The Brahmakumari's World Spiritual University teaches Raj Yoga, meditation, as a way of helping us to stay cool on a day like this. Cool meaning peaceful, peaceful, calm, and particularly in challenging circumstances, which we all come across, but also to use spiritual values in a practical way in our everyday life. So we've been involved with international green initiatives since 1992, officially, on a more official level. At the first Rio conference, the Brahmakumari's Environment Initiative has been encouraging green initiatives in all the centers across the world. We have a presence at all the COPs, and our message is very simple, that change has to start in human hearts and in our lifestyle. And this can lead to a wider change in the world. So the Brahmakumaris are the largest single institutional users of solar energy in India. And last year, a 1 megawatt thermal solar power plant became operational at our headquarters in Abu. We'll be playing a short video about it after the tea break. We also have an ongoing water treatment project and have received an award from the World CSR Congress for best water management practices. And locally, we're a group of environmentally friendly individuals who have been researching into ecologically friendly practices, such as cleaning these big buildings with environmentally friendly products and using biodegradable plastic tableware. We have been gradually moving into a more sustainable awareness and behavior individually and collectively. So this afternoon is dedicated to the UN World Environment Day, and the theme of this year is Beat Plastic Pollution, urging governments, industry, communities and individuals to come together and explore sustainable alternatives and urgently reduce the production of excessive use of single-use plastic, which pollutes our oceans, damages marine life, and threatens human health. As we say, when I change, the world changes. When we change, the world changes. We'll now have the Earth Dance by a very talented young person. His name is Thiru Seelan. He's an Indian classical and contemporary dancer, and he's doing an MA in dance movement psychotherapy.
let me introduce our three wonderful and astute speakers. Our first speaker, Sister Jayanti, who some of you are perhaps already familiar with, is the European Director of the Brahmakumaris. She's a spiritual leader of 50 years. And she's headed the BK delegation for the UN climate change conferences since 2009. So, gentlemen, if you'd like to take the stage. A big hand for gentlemen. Thank you, guys. Our second speaker is Dharmachari Sanghasiha. Dharmachari is a meditation teacher at the London Buddhist Center, and who regularly organizes and runs deep ecology retreats. Big hand for Sanghasiha. Thank you. Please join us. Thank you. And last but definitely not least, we have a wonderful speaker, Catherine Allinson, who runs Future Earth Limited, which is a small consultancy that deals with environmentally conscious project management. A big hand for Catherine, please. Thank you. Now, each speaker is generously going to share with us for 10 minutes. So whoever would like to start, really just open this wonderful discussion, please. Catherine, would you like to start?
So it's an absolute honor to be here and to have this conversation with you all and with Sister Jayanti, a wonderful colleague. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'd like to share with you a few stories about the Earth and some of the incredible people that live on the planet and have helped us to understand our impact on the planet. So I'm going to go through sort of 3 points, really. One is about the Anthropocene, the story of our human achievement. The second is about what's technically known as planetary regulation, which we could also see as harmony and how we all fit together. And the third thing is about how we can adapt our behavior and our consciousness to live in better harmony with each other through collaboration and with the Earth. So really the Earth is an extraordinary place, I'm sure you'll agree. It's blossomed into a paradise from a little thing that crawled out of the bog many thousands of years ago. And we've thrived as human species on this planet, but we've cut down trees to clear land for agriculture. We've built cities. We've raised livestock to give us high energy protein that makes us run faster and do things better and even more quickly and quickly. And then we've run so fast that we've actually made it to the moon. So we've really achieved a phenomenal amount in our 7,000 years. In fact, as proof of our success, there's been a 95% increase in world population since 1970. Some of us were alive in 1970. 95% increase since then. Today, or actually yesterday when I checked, it was 7.6 billion. It seems like 2 years ago when it just switched over to 7 billion, didn't it? And I suppose it's through our ability to question why, that question, why do things happen, and our ability to collectively, actively organize that we've become so very successful. And we understand, we use, and sadly also deplete our 4 spheres, the spheres of the air, water, land, and all living species on the planet. In fact, there's an organization called the Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, that is now assessing ecosystems as well as the species that you're probably more familiar with, the red list it's called. And at the moment, there are 25,000 species critically threatened with extinction on that list. And they're now looking at ecosystems, which is how those 4 spheres that I mentioned a moment ago react together. And did you know that the mudflats in northern France were under threat of extinction? You know, something very close to home, somewhere where some people might take holidays. And that's because we've overused these resources. We used to be very much in tune with nature, didn't we? But we've somehow lost that ability to feel and to listen to Earth and its rhythms. If you think of the way Aboriginals used to navigate across Australia in search of water, which no one can explain how they did it, but they managed to feel where the water was. The properties of ancient Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, that no one can quite explain how people have come to know why these things work. And imagine having open heart surgery under acupuncture, it's extraordinary. And also the Native American Indians, who know more about watersheds and their management than any technical university in the United States. And they've never read a book. So the second thing I want to talk about is this balance idea, this idea of balance. So I read yesterday that the Lakota say, Mitake yai oisen, which means we are all related, we are all connected. But we're out of balance, and we've been blind to this deep connection that we have with one another. And we've been focusing on market-driven economics, certainly in this part of the world, perhaps not everywhere. And we've sort of forgotten, I think, that human happiness and fulfillment is based on social and environmental harmony. Now, having studied Earth systems and climate scientists, I do agree with people like James Lovelock and Johann Rockström that we all started as particles of dust somewhere, somehow, in the Big Bang, and it's to dust that we will eventually physically go. But it's our transcendent capabilities beyond this physical manifestation that remain, the histories of our ancestors and how we relate to each other just on sight. Think of somebody looking at you in the tube and you turn around and catch their eye. We feel it, but that's not a physical connection. That's a mental and spiritual connection that's going on. And that's no more felt than when we care deeply and love each other. Now, James Lovelock was an amazing scientist. He was a medic and a scientist. And he invented what's called the electron capture detector. And that was a little gizmo that helped lead scientists who came after him to detect the ozone layer depletion. And he believed that the entire Earth, his Gaia, is a self-regulatory system. It's a living organism that finds its own balance. And Johann Rockström, who is the executive director of the Stockholm Resilience Center, he took that and made it into the 9 planetary boundaries principles, where we have to be careful that we don't exceed how much resource we take from the Earth, lest we tip over those planetary boundaries and fall into a state that we can very poorly live in and adapt to. Now, we've already reached 4 of those planetary boundaries, and that's just in the last 4 years. 4 years ago, it was only 2. In the last 4 years, we've now gone over 4 of them. Climate change, carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere, the extinction of species and the rate of that extinction, deforestation, and 2 biochemical processes that happen when we put things like fertilizers on our fields and they flow into the rivers, the phosphorus and nitrogen cycles. In fact, deforestation is so bad that researchers now think that our wonderful tropical forests are no longer carbon sinks. They're actually releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is a big problem. So every single atom that we have on this earth is a resource, isn't it? We shouldn't waste anything. And it's our responsibility as humans living together, mainly in cities now, to do what we can to understand and find the equilibrium so that we use them sustainably. I mean, if sea levels rise, the old horseshoe crabs, who are prehistoric animals, they have their shell. They can hunker down and weather dry periods, but also climb a little bit higher. But it's much more difficult for a coral or for a Homo sapien. We're only 7,000 years old. That's a jot of the eye compared with the horseshoe crab. So I want to give you 4 facts, because I'm a scientist, and if I didn't give you any facts, I wouldn't be doing my job, right? So the first thing is Earth Overshoot Day last year, was on the 2nd of August. Now, Earth Overshoot Day means the day where we use more than one planet's worth of resources. And I gave a talk to Edinburgh University in 2005, and in 2005, Earth Overshoot Day was the 13th of August. So we're going the wrong way. We are using far more than we should. Second fact is that, and this is a tough one to swallow, 93 billion tons of resources, excluding water, enters the global economy a year to provide for our food, energy, houses, clothes, everything that we use. Now, if you translate that down to our single level, that's half my weight per day that I use in resources. That's phenomenal. That was a horrific statistic, even for me. I'm thinking, I'm lugging half, you know, if I put those all in a big bag, that's what I use every day. No wonder we're piling up the waste in the world. And coming to the subject of plastic, which is the focus of UN World Environment Day this year, it's estimated that 93 billion tons of plastic has been produced since the 1950s. 480 billion plastic bottles, this is a prop, were sold in 2016. Nearly a quarter of those by the Coca-Cola company. This is by Schweppes, they're probably pretty close behind. So that's a human buying one plastic bottle every minute around the planet. Now, given that that takes 450 years to biodegrade, can you imagine what dreadful pollution we're creating just through the use of plastic bottles? So that's an easy fix, isn't it? Let's face it, we can all just not use these. And in the UK, for every 100-metre stretch of beach, there are 718 pieces of litter. And if you go to any African or Asian country, you can times that by 4. I don't know why we throw things away when they haven't reached the end of their life. You know, we call them waste, but until we've used them, surely they're not waste. They're still kind of, we can make things out of them. We should use our ingenuity. And the last fact I want to mention is topsoil. It's really important because if we don't preserve our topsoil, which seems a very random thing for us sitting in this room here today and we're not sort of out digging the fields, but if we lose that, our planet ends up looking like the moon, which is a barren desert. And we really don't want that to happen. Now, 1/3 of all soils on Earth are already degraded from erosion, from people using them. And it takes 1,000 years for just 3 centimeters of topsoil to gather, which is what we grow our crops in. So even if we move away from meat, we've still got to grow crops. So we really need to keep hold of this very, very important mineral. But it's not all doom and gloom. Let's get rid of the facts. We're also increasingly aware of our actions. And it's what we're doing to refine that behavior and awaken our consciousness that is really important on how we sustain life on Earth. So 2015 was a really good year. We had 3 global agreements. Imagine that. 195 countries coming together to peacefully agree something. That's a phenomenal achievement. And the first was what was called the Sendai Disaster Risk a reduction framework under the auspices of the UN ISDR. That's the part of the UN that looks after disasters. And they aim to strengthen countries' resilience against disasters, natural and human, that happen around the world. And I was very taken by the dance that there was that sort of change halfway through, wasn't there, where everything sort of became destructive. And I was thinking, it's just like a hurricane, the hurricane that happened in Haiti last year, where so many people were displaced, their homes damaged. They estimate it's going to cost $1 billion to clean up that destruction. And it's because of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that the hydro cycle is getting faster and faster. So it's water sucking up power from the warmer seas is much more intense, and it can also, once it's sucked it up, the clouds are able to spit them back out again with such ferocity that damage is caused. The second thing that happened was a fantastic, energetic, passionate economist called Jeffrey Sachs led a number of working groups to launch the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is our common vision to help all people live happy, healthy lives by 2030. And Goal number 13 of the 17 looks at climate change. It says to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And for me, as a climate scientist, this is the most special of those goals. And the reason that we have the Paris Agreement is because of the most incredible woman. Cristina Figueras was a lawyer, a diplomat, and she spent a decade of her life trying to get people to the table to agree something, and she achieved it. And I think she and Jeff are the most extraordinary people of the last 5 years for getting the globe on board behind agendas like this. And of course, each country, let's look at country level, the UK, has what's called their nationally determined contributions to climate change. That's what we're going to do in order to reduce our domestic carbon emissions by 2030 so that we can be a world-leading nation and show how this country can decarbonize, which it really, really needs to. So to come down a little bit more to local level, my friend Katie Thomas in Peterborough leads what's called Opportunity Peterborough. It's part of the Circular Economy Peterborough Pledge, which all businesses and the city of Peterborough came together to agree that they would make their city circular, which essentially means not wasting things. So keeping everything that comes into Peterborough in Peterborough for as long as possible. And they do it in a very practical way. They come together to share those resources, whether it's office space, a place on a training course, chairs, skills. Everything you need to run a small business, because small businesses have trouble expanding and they might not have a computer for every person. But perhaps a big business has got 3 or 4 people who aren't in the office that day and can loan their computers on a day-to-day business basis. So it's a fantastic little operation that is really making inroads at city level, though. So I wish her very well with that. And the second example I'd like to give you is from a place called Roubaix in northern France. Now, Roubaix is an old textile city. It has a population of just under 100,000, but 25% of the people in the city live below the poverty line. And the mayor, the deputy mayor there, was a young man in his 30s, very early 30s, so 32 years, and he decided that they should become a net zero waste city. And he went out and realized that in order to get people to reduce their waste, what he had to do was instill their sense of pride in their own city. So he enrolled 100 families, and over the period of a year, they were giving training, and they managed to reduce their waste, 70% of them reduced their waste by 50%. And another 20% by 80%. That's an enormous amount if you think how much waste you put out through the door every day, and to reduce that by half, and then again by more than a half. And the thing that really stood out for me in that case study was it was the motivation of the people to get involved with realizing that they had a sense of place and decency about where they were living. So crime rate fell. They started organizing themselves into work. So many unemployed people living there, they realized that through developing their skills in being productive in the home to fill some of the gaps that they would normally go and buy stuff and throw it away, but then to make it at home, they started making beer. But instead of buying bottles, because they couldn't afford to, they got a local artist who was a glassmaker to start making beer bottles. And then they said, well, we won't recycle the beer bottles, we'll clean them here. And they set up an old laundry, got redesigned to clean bottles, and then they brought the bottles back in to be refilled for beer. So they've managed to contain, again, it's a sort of circular system, they've contained their processes and reduced their waste, and they've created jobs for themselves. So it's this amazing mental shift of positive, conscious decisions to be proud of what they're doing and to help and guide one another that's so amazing. So I would like to finish with 3 things. Who we are, A-R-E. So for me, the most important thing we can do is to act. Be a change agent. Do a life audit. Have a look at how you shop, how you travel, how you eat. And see if you can make a few shifts just to tread a little more lightly on earth. The second is to reflect. to think very deeply about how we engage with each other and with the environment, and to spend more time in it. Doesn't matter if it's raining. Umbrellas do a great job. And lastly is to engage. Engage with each other, engage with your family, and tell them how you feel when you're out in the rain and getting soaked and coming back and you're, drenched to your knickers. Well, it's not like we're made of sugar. We're not going to dissolve.
Thank you for that, Catherine. That was incredibly informative, and I think that's going to take me a while to digest all of the facts and the information that you offer there, so genuinely, thank you. Sanghasiha, would you care to share something with us? Thank you.
And I think I ought to point out that I'm a humble meditation teacher. I'm not an expert, and I'm not a scientist. I'm not a campaigner. I'm not an expert of any other sort, actually. So, but I do have a deep conviction that as spiritual practitioners or as spiritual seekers, we have an essential part to play in meeting environmental crisis. And I'd like to start with a story from a lovely book called Wild Comfort. It's by an American writer called Kathleen Dean Moore. It's a very short story. There's a man who searched and searched the sacred in nature, in the forest, at the beach, and sure enough, one day as he's walking along the coast, he heard a voice, loud and clear. "Stand here," it said, "and listen." The man stood. What else could he do? What would you have done? He stood for a very long time, shifting his weight from one leg to the other. His back stiffened up. A flock of brants flew down the trough between the breakers. The wind came up and died back. The tide flowed in. He zipped his jacket and unzipped it, zipped it again. The sun went down and gulls cried and flew their roosts. He shivered in a fog that came with night, and finally he went home. So what happened here? Did he find what he was looking for? We don't know. The story doesn't go on. But didn't the sound of the wind bring the rain and the rattle of the surf-driven stone, didn't all these tell him something of what he needed to do? That he was alive in that place in the midst of all that life, the stinging sand, the storm-driven waves. They were the cause for surprise and celebration, that this was sacred, that this world is irreplaceable, astonishing, contingent, beginningless, always changing, beautiful and fearsome, worthy of reverence, awe and protection. A good few years ago, before I became a practicing Buddhist, I came across the work of a Norwegian philosopher, environmental activist and a mountaineer called Arne Næss. And I was profoundly affected by what I read. And here are 3 paragraphs from his writings, which I found especially powerful. Everything is conceivable, anything can happen. The future is so unformed that it is neither desirable nor indeed possible to produce a cut-and-dried philosophy of life. If it were, we would stagnate. Deep ecology begins and ends with wonder, profound wonder. On that account, we ought to consider life, indeed our very existence, as a flowing current. And it is the emotions that set a life in motion. Emotions stimulate you on your way through life and provide the impulse for action and changes of attitude. The natural order has intrinsic value that transcends human values. Humans can only attain realization of self as part of an entire ecosphere and recognizing this natural order. Big ecological problems cannot be resolved within an industrial capitalist society, but only by recognizing the intrinsic value of all forms of life and the environment rather than utilitarian rules or market values. So Arne Næss's concepts are informed by Spinoza philosophically, the Buddha spiritually, and Gandhi politically, especially in the relation to non-violent protest. And he further elaborates, we don't say that every living being has the same value as a human, but we say that it has an intrinsic value which is not quantifiable. It is not equal or unequal. It is a right to live and blossom. I may kill a mosquito if it is on the face of my baby, but I will never say I have a higher right to life than a mosquito. So there's an explicit link here between deep ecology and the Buddha's teachings on Paticca what is known as conditioned co-arising. John Seed, Joanna Macy and Gary Schneider and others have all worked and explored this nature, the area in their lives expertly. And as Buddhist teachings on interconnectedness go far beyond our mundane experience and point us towards the transcendental. And deep ecology goes far beyond the study of the relationships between organisms and their environments. It points to a profound truth about our relationship to ourselves, to one another, and the world. Deep ecologists believe that we need to renounce the idols that have set us apart from nature, those of technology, capitalism, and militarism, patriarchy, materialism, the consumer society, and increasing sophistication of our own lives. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell, says Edward Abbey, the environmental and political activist. Our relationship with nature, both cultivated and wild, has been characterized by post-enlightenment, enlightenment in the historical and cultural sense, of course, Cartesian separation, of dualism and alienation. In the West, in particular, we have inherited an anthropocentric view of the world and are often engaged in a utilitarian relationship with the natural environment. The Enlightenment view was largely underwritten by the dogma of the Abrahamic religions and has, in my view, and the opinion of many deep ecologists and Buddhists in the West, directly led and continues to lead towards the despoilation of the earth and our own spiritual, ethical, physical and psychological diminishing, and perhaps even our eventual extinction. Urigen Sangharakshita, my own teacher, in his book The Bodhisattva Ideal, says that Buddhism is essentially pagan and animist, an outlook shared by many indigenous peoples of the world. And one of its characteristics is a sense of connectedness with life on earth. And we gain a more direct experience of this through celebrations and rituals, around the seasons, for example, and engaging with the mythical, the archetypal and the non-rational. He says, nature is healthy and good, and one is part of it. One is oneself, in a sense, essence, natural, healthy, and innocent. Buddhism has its roots here. Animism is empathy with the natural world. Paganism could be described as paying reverence to it, the natural world. So Bhante, my teacher, says, don't throw away your animism or your paganism. So now I quote the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. If we surrendered to the earth's intelligence, we would rise up, rooted like trees. In my work leading deep ecology retreats and days, we are reconnecting with our animist and pagan roots through meditation, poetry, music, ritual and performance, and readings from the Buddhist canon and the deep ecology movement. The message is universal, and everyone is welcome to attend or take part. Connecting to a sense of mystery and the magical is essential. As the British scientist James Lovelock says in A Rough Guide to the Future, humanity badly needs to know that an inability to explain something rationally does not deny its existence. And he goes on, what I do understand is that rational thinking is not necessarily our greatest property, although we prize it. It may be a handicap. We have to recognize that in addition to conscious rational thinking, our minds are capable of other, more powerful mental processes that lead us by intuition to grasp a tiny sparkling fragment of reality. And it's the mystical and the magical and the non-rational that will reintegrate us with the natural world and lead us home. And as Gary Schneider says, nature is not a place to visit, it is home. And again, Urigen Sangharakshita, my own teacher and founder of the Triratna Buddhist order, says, we are related to nature. This relationship may be compared to seeing a light through a thick veil. Sometimes the veil seems to be so thick that we're unable to see the light at all. But referring back to the Pali Canon, these are early Buddhist writings. There are frequent references to tree spirits, fairy-like creatures living in flowers, etc., etc. And while quite magical, this is also quite real and spiritually true when you experience the whole of nature as animated. And this is the background of the Buddha's teachings. The murmur of nature is always there. The trees rustling, the peacocks screaming, and tigers roaring. And we ignore this connection at our peril. And it seems to me that if we continue to be intoxicated with economic and technological process, we're like the active alcoholic or addict, stumbling blindly into the future, thinking that we can go on in our madness indefinitely, thinking that somehow our behaviour does not affect the world around us, that we're somehow separate from it. And this has led to a greater division and inequality within our own species, economically, politically, and socially. Wealth and power increasingly concentrated in a select few individuals, corporations, and ruling elites. Our separation from the natural world has left us further spiritually depleted and resource depleted. And that spiritual resource depletion has divided us further still. We're responsible for this because we are sentient. We know that our actions have consequences. We may not be aware of those consequences, or we may deny their effects, but we are still responsible. Our actions affect every single part of the globe and every ecosystem. And here's Gary Schneider again from his book, The Practice of the Wild. The world is watching. One cannot walk through a meadow or a forest without a ripple of report spreading out from one's passage. The thrush darts back, the jay squalls, the beetle scuttles under the grasses, and the signal is passed along. Every creature knows when a hawk is cruising or a human strolling. This information is passed through the system, is called intelligence. And the last words of the Buddha were reported to be apamadema sampadeta, meaning with mindfulness strive on. So we need to pay attention to what's going on, to wake up, to listen, to see, to feel, to touch, to wonder. The Sufi teacher and musician Hazrat Inayat Khan says in The Mysticism of Sound and Music, there is nothing in this world that does not speak. Everything and every being is continually calling out its nature, its character, its secret. The more the inner sense is open, the more capable it becomes of hearing the voice of all things. Unless our fundamental attitude and relationship changes at the very deepest level, then the consequences for us as a species are dire, both in terms of physical, economic, political, social, and spiritual health. The question is not now one of progress or even sustainability, but one of withdrawal and retreat if we're to survive. This sounds very depressing, hopeless even. But as Joanna Macy says, the Bodhisattva knows that if you're afraid to get close to the pain of the world, then you'll be banished from its joy as well. So here's what we can do. Raise awareness, campaign, lobby, live a mindful life, take only what we need, research, question, educate ourselves and others, engage more deeply with our spiritual practice, develop non-exploitative economic models and technologies, and much more. But most of all, staying connected with that sense of wonder through the cultivation of loving kindness and the practice of mindfulness. So I'd like now to finish with a short poem by the American poet William Stafford. It's called The Well Rising. The well rising without a sound, the spring on the hillside, the ploughshare brimming through deep ground everywhere in the field. The sharp swallows in the swerve, flaring and hesitating, hunting for the final curve, coming closer and closer. Those swallows' heart from wingbeat to wingbeat, counselling decision, thunderous examples. I place my feet with care in such a world.
Thank you for that deeply profound sharing, Sanghasiha. I think the words of Lovelock really quite resonated with me, and I'll return back to that afterwards. Sister Jayanti, would you like to share?
Thank you. Om Shanti. A greeting of peace to each and every one. And thank you to Thiru for an amazing dance. And thank you to Catherine for very powerful statistics and information. And thank you for the beautiful poetry with which you shared. I'd like to begin by mentioning a comment that Dadi Janki had made when she was here. She left last week for St. Petersburg, today Moscow, tomorrow Delhi, and after that somewhere else. So it's amazing. Well, just hearing that timetable is one thing, but knowing her physical age is 102, gives you an idea that there must be something that she's learned about harmony with nature and her own body that keeps her going in this way. What she said was that the dignity of an enlightened soul is seen through its contentment. And why I begin with that is because I see that the discontent that people carry today, they're trying to be able to fill in that empty space with acquisition, whether it's property, devices, clothes, shoes, all the things that are part of consumerism and materialism. And if I go back to the root of this distress and why there isn't this contentment, it's something that we've alluded to already. I think it's being out of touch with their own inner world and the being within. Because when I do come back to that awareness of who I am and I connect with myself, I rediscover my own inner dignity. I rediscover the contentment that I carry within myself. And that changes my life in a very important way. In a very personal situation, I decided that I wanted to have a life of spirituality, and not just spirituality, I wanted to devote my life to that when I was 19. And it was very interesting because all the external pulls fell away just instantly. I've struggled with other things since then, so it hasn't been a straightforward journey. But the pull to external things literally finished at that moment. And after that, if it's there, available, fine. If it's not there, it's also okay. But there's no desire, there's no pull for these things. And it happened very fast. And I think that it's a very powerful solution to a lot of situations that come up in the world. If even a small fraction of the world were to start moving in the direction of simplicity and be willing to change their diet, for example, two very practical solutions to the problems of the world. And I think a lot could change. But I want to go back to that first statement, the dignity that comes from knowing the self. If I replace that word dignity with valuing the self, respect for the self, that shows me another very important aspect of the whole situation with ecology. Because when I value myself by knowing myself, and I'm able to come back to the inner identity of the self rather than the external form, then in that connection with my spiritual identity and seeing the values that I carry, I'm able to have respect for myself. And we have a very simple formula that explains many things in the world out there, and that is inside out, which means that when I have self-respect, I'm able to respect other humans. I see them as part of my family. I'm able to respect all forms of life, which means there will not be violence, there will be no killing. It's not an option. It just isn't possible. But not just all forms of life, there will also be respect to all aspects of nature and the world around me. The word ecology, my home, the study of my home, the understanding of my home. And my first home, the home of the soul, is this sacred chariot, this sacred vehicle of mine, this home of mine. And I, as the living being within this home provided to me by nature, will be very careful how I use it and what I use it for. And then beyond this ecology, yes, this home, I'll tread lightly in this home. Brahma Baba the founder, used to teach us and say, are you thumping the earth as you move, or are you stepping lightly on the earth? And you know yourself when you're in a bit of a grumpy mood, and when you're feeling light and happy and easy, there's a different way in which you move. And so it's a physical thing, not just a spiritual thing, but the inner is seen by the outer. And so can I treat this home of mine with that love and respect, knowing it offers very important shelter? But bigger than that, am I able to treat this planet, which is our home, equally with that love and respect and care? They say that no other species pollutes its own nest, only the human species. And I think that's absolutely true. And so the realization that this is my home, what am I doing to it? And then to be able to translate that inner respect for the soul, by the soul, for all aspects out there, means that there's a different relationship I have with the world around me and this planet. In fact, all the traditions at some point have taught people the value of respect, and in particular respecting nature. And today we've forgotten those simple things. Even a simple thing like a prayer before a meal, or a thanksgiving after a meal. Maybe we'll have a celebration of Thanksgiving once a year, but the rest of the year we forget. But truly giving thanks for what it is nature has provided for me, and to thank the one who has allowed that to happen also. So the simple things in life that we used to have that reminded us of our connection with nature, we've forgotten those. Too busy, busy, busy. Busy in what? There was an interesting statement that was on the screen just before we began this program, and that was, we don't need to think so much. And so the busyness is so much in here. The output, well, I'm not sure how much there is. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But certainly we can create space to come back to those sacred moments of quiet at the dawn, at the start of the day, moments of quiet before we eat, moments of quiet in the evenings when the family comes together. And so coming back to silence, coming back to our own inner world and appreciating the beauty there is within, and be able to see the beauty out there too. We've used the expression consciousness and climate change in a very big way since we started attending the climate change conferences. And there's a very straight link between consciousness and climate, though it sounds as if it's miles apart. My awareness impacts my attitude impacts my vision impacts my actions impact the culture I create, and my culture creates the world in which I live. And so I'll tell you the Hindi words because they rhyme, and even if you don't remember them, it's fine. But the idea was translated to you already. But smriti, vritti, and then drishti, then kriti, and then sanskriti, and then srishti. Sounds nice. Okay, so consciousness and awareness impacts the world through the changes that happen inside. And in the consciousness that there's only matter, everything is only material, without the awareness of spiritual, and the spiritual dimension has led to the reduction of everything in nature to its commercial cost. And so the forest isn't a source of beauty or a resource of nature, it's become wood, timber, cut, 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 or it's providing grassland for feeding cattle, or it's creating space for a road so that we can move A to B with greater ease. So everything's been reduced to pounds and pence and dollars and cents, and that isn't what life is about. Life isn't about these things. The beauty of life, the truth of life, the love we experience, the happiness, none of that is pounds and pence or dollars, very definitely. And so coming back to the spiritual understanding of who I am and my relationship with nature, I think that is really the fundamental factor. And it's been very beautiful to see how this type of consciousness has been penetrating things in COP. And you mentioned Christiana Figueres. She is an amazing woman. And she is the one who has been encouraging interfaith contributions to climate change. Copenhagen 2006, and we were at the fringe of things. But gradually over the last 4 years or so, maybe longer, 5 years, interfaith representation has been there at all the different panels. And you also mentioned the International Conservation of Nature, and they wouldn't have given us a platform a few years earlier, but they did a couple of years ago in Paris. And they wanted to have the inclusion of the faith representatives. And so I'm seeing that Christiana Figueres made an interesting comment. She said when she came to a small gathering that we had in Bonn a few years ago, we were 25. At side events, that's about what you get. That's a good number. She said, I'm here with a small group of you, even though there's hundreds outside, but what you're doing here is connected with the heart. What they're talking about is the head, and I think the heart is important and has to be given value. And so bringing the heart back into discussions and considerations about the planet is definitely going in the right way. But I have to say, things need to move faster. And maybe whether things with the negotiations and agreements move faster or not, I think that the momentum of human consciousness and awareness is definitely moving faster. And people are coming to that understanding that it's my responsibility to change what's going on in here and here, but also what it is I actually do when I go out and buy things and the things that I do on the external level. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Jayanti, for the clarity of your wisdom. Now, we have 5 minutes for me to ask you guys questions, and I'm quite overwhelmed by all the wisdom, the profoundness, and all the facts that have been thrown at me, and I've been quite vigorously writing notes and questions I have about what the three of you shared. Really, this theme of being related, as you so beautifully put, Catherine, being interconnected, as you so beautifully shared, Sanghasiha, and this aspect of harmony, you know, this interconnectedness. Oftentimes, that can appear or seem to the perception of our mind to be quite fluffy. So could you guys share and elaborate on this interconnectedness, the practicality of it, the reality of it?
I could say start with something. I think it just starts for me with the Buddha taught of about 3 areas of practice. That's my spiritual tradition, so that's what I rely upon. And the first area of practice is what he called sila. And sila means ethics, ethical behaviour. And that's where it starts with me. It's about being kinder. It's about non-harm. It's about being honest. And it's about... so that's in essence what the foundation of connection. Particularly the first precept, as we call it, which is the precept of non-harm. Harm is the absolute opposite of that. That's disconnection.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I consider myself to be a bit of a catalyst. That's kind of my role that I've labelled myself with for the moment. May change. So for me, it's all about being active. And I tell you, it's damn hard work. It's a lot of hours. Even to come here, just to let you know, I worked all day yesterday. That's a good 8 hours to kind of put my thoughts down on paper. That wasn't hard work at all. I love reading and learning about this. So, but it's beyond that. It's how do I maintain the contact with you afterwards? How do I maintain the contact with you? If we've shared a business card, that doesn't mean anything. That just means I've got a piece of paper. Should have left it on the tree. So it's about it's about picking up the phone, saying, "Hey, what can we do together? How can we move faster with our consciousness and move? I mean, it's about being silent and then being an explosion, like we saw in the dance. This beautiful transition between a moment of stillness and then an explosion of energy. We're very good at doing that. That's what humans do really well. We used to run across the savannas to catch our impala or whatever it was way back when. We didn't lose that ability.
Thank you for that. Sister Jayanti.
Okay.
We have a minute, by the way. 2 minutes. Okay.
My understanding of harmony is firstly to sort things out in here. So my emotions and feelings and my conscience, to be able to align them, because otherwise very often my desires pull in one way and my conscience is telling me no, but there's a struggle. And so can I find a way to align my thoughts, my feelings and my conscience to the highest, not the lowest denominator, but the highest. And it's possible through reflection and silence and meditation. And if I'm in harmony in here, I'm more likely to find balance and harmony of soul and body. And then what I do out here will be filled with that safety, that security and compassion and goodness, benevolence, rather than aggression and conflict.
We go on to the meditation by Sanghasiha.
It's an invitation just to sit upright in your chair. Try not to use the back of the chair to support your weight. You're sitting slightly forward, almost as though you're just about to get out of the chair. Important you've got your legs uncrossed, your feet flat on the ground. And if you can, support your hands. You can either adopt this beautiful mudra, which is the dhyana mudra. It's the mudra of meditative absorption. And just drop your hands onto your laps. Or just make sure your hands are supported in some way. And let the weight of your shoulders fall towards the floor. Just so you can find your head in the center of your shoulders. And drop your gaze towards the floor. Close your eyes. If you're uncomfortable with your eyes shut, you can just hood your eyelids. The first thing to do is just to notice all the points where your body makes contact with the floor or the structure of the chair. Let gravity do its work. Getting a sense of the touch of the fabric and cloth of your clothes against the body. Temperature of the air against the skin. The sounds that surround us. The sounds of our own body. And just spend a moment describing to yourself how you feel, your emotional tone. You feel happy, sad, or something in between. You feel tired or energized or something in between. However you feel, wherever you find yourself, that's a good place to start. And with that kindly awareness, taking your attention down to the belly. And just spend a moment just noticing how the belly rises and expands with the in-breath and the out-breath. No need to change the pattern of your breathing. And from the belly, take your awareness up to the chest area. And noticing how the chest expands and contracts with the in-breath and the out-breath. And from the chest to the tip of the nose, edges of the nostrils, and the tips of the upper lip of the mouth. A very subtle flow of air as it first moves into the body on the in-breath, last leaves the body on the out-breath. As we connect with our breath, that's just reflecting that we share this process of breathing with nearly all forms of life, from single cell organisms. Exchange the gas between the cell wall to ourselves. And from that sense of the breath, entering the body around the mouth and the nose, imagine the breath now travelling all the way down to the toes of the feet. The whole body coming alive to the breath. A sense of energy coursing through the body. And gently expanding that awareness back into the room again. And just spending a moment or so resting in that awareness. Going nowhere, doing nothing, making no effort. As the third chime of the bell fades away, inviting you to open your eyes and sit at ease.
Okay. Any first takers that would like to ask a question?
First of all, thank you very much for an inspiring talk. I want to ask you this. There is a particular world leader that does not believe in climate change.
I mean, you can just say it.
If you have an opportunity to speak to him, what would you say?
Okay. So, yeah, what would you guys say?
I think I'd be breaking all my Buddhist speech precepts.
I think I would ask him to think not of himself, but to reflect on how he would like his grandchildren to experience the earth. And if he enjoyed skiing as a youngster, which I'm sure he did with his financial capacity, then to know that his grandchildren may not have that experience. He would be taking away by his actions. Although he might be safeguarding jobs and growth, what is he safeguarding in terms of happiness and experience?
I'd ask him to look at the statistics of the hurricanes that are happening in his own land.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that carbon is only a measure. So when we started off the Low Carbon Foundation back in 2000, working with the government to bring in their carbon policies and working with Europe on the low CVP, what we were trying to do was to get an approximation. Now, carbon everybody uses, and I wouldn't get hung up about carbon. It's something natural. We use it, the birds use it, the bees and the trees. It's the pollution that's the problem. So if you look at the equivalent NOx, SOx and COx, you should think about stop flying, because that's putting things in the wrong place. It's putting it in the stratosphere where we don't need it. So each plane takes off with 100 to 200 tons of fuel every time, which is then combusted, burned, and produces NOx, SOx, and COx. So go by train.
Right. So to be more considerate and mindful of our means of transportation. Absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Just to continue that gentleman's summary, I wonder how many people walk more than 15 minutes to anywhere. Wow, you are a good group. Okay, hat off. Chunk. Okay, you passed.
Okay, well, I have a couple questions. So, Catherine, you spoke about Gaia and that Earth is a living organism. Now, my question is in regard to the homeostasis of the Earth and how, essentially, it has always managed to keep its equilibrium. Could you guys share your views on that?
I think there's... we need to have a look at Earth before humans and Earth after humans in order to answer that question. Earth is always in flux. It's a combination of processes which are influenced by the Milankovitch cycles as we pass around the sun, for instance. Those have an influence on the monsoon. That has an influence on our crops. That has an influence on what goes into the soil every year and on into the rivers and down to the ocean. And the cycles, these ecosystem cycles, are constantly in flux. Nothing is stable. Everything is in motion. When humans came along, we kind of started to tip the balance. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad to change. We're living in a period of change. Change is good. It's whether we want the change to happen at such an extreme rate. And it affects usually the poorest and the most vulnerable first. And at the moment, we're in a situation where you have dramatic sea level rise in certain parts of the globe, a loss of livelihoods in other parts of the globe, angry hurricanes in yet another part of the globe. And it's whether we want to cope with a world in that state of dramatic flux, or whether we prefer the periods of calm in between, which are also changing. Everything will always change, there's no debate. And in fact, I prefer to use the term climate variability rather than climate change, because climate has always changed and will always change.
Sanghasiha, you mentioned this beautiful quote by Lovelock, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but not being able to explain something rationally doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't disprove it. How can we move away from our obsession to rationalize things?
This was a huge struggle for me in my own spiritual life, where I come from a sort of very rationalist background. I was one of those guys, actually, who used to fly aeroplanes. That was my job. I was an airline pilot for 16 years. And I used to dump loads of carbon in the stratosphere as part of my job. And I have a very rational part of my mind. And what I realized that a huge part of what was missing was that ability to contact the non-rational, the mythical, the archetypal. And that really comes down to something we talked about a little bit earlier as well. It's a sort of sense of beauty, connecting. I really resonated with the lady in the orange there who was talking about the flowers. That meant a lot, and that was an aspect of my life which was very, very absent. And I actually had to give up flying, and that was a gift. That was a real gift. I had a heart condition, which meant that I lost my medical validation. But quite often, as one of the quotes that I use from Joanne Macy is that it's coming into the suffering of the world that we also realise its joy. And part of the joy for me was reconnecting with, which was something that was as much sense of spiritual longing, which I used to regard as something that was a sort of a deficit. I now realise that actually spiritual longing is something that's there for my benefit and for the benefit of others. And that spiritual longing manifests itself in connecting with the magical, with the mythical. For something to be spiritually true, it doesn't have to be rationalized, it doesn't have to be empirically tested, it doesn't have to be seen, touched, or quantified in any way.
Sister Jayanti, do you wish to elaborate or add anything onto that? Yeah, Sister Jayanti.
Two things. One was when somebody asked me the question, is it possible to, taking up that story of flowers, is it possible to quantify the beauty of a rose? Is it the length of its stem? Is it the size of its leaves? How do you do that? And if you're trying to explain to somebody that a rose is beautiful, there's no way you can quantify it. And so that explains to me that, rationality doesn't always explain everything. But the other one was very much from my own personal experience that when Dadi Janki, in fact, was opening up this, the third eye, she was speaking about conscience, about feelings, about emotions, about memory, things like this. And you know that they're there because everybody experiences these. But again, how do you quantify that? And what box do you put memory in? It's, yes, okay, there's a part of my brain that deals with it, but you and I can share the same experience, but the memory we'll hold of that will be very personal. And so just thinking about, I would use the word soul today for all these aspects of the inner being. And so for me, understanding soul made me understand myself, made me understand what was going on. And it wasn't science, and my background had been very much an interest in science. But this was something that science had no answers for at all. And so definitely I agree with James Lovelock.
Just on the same thread, on that thread of conscience, it seems that many of us have lost our conscience along the way somehow. how do we reacquire and reacquaint ourselves with that conscience?
Example that I just learnt from you just now, Steve. Steve said he needed to get out into nature more. And to spend time being still in nature and observing it. And I would encourage everybody in the room to come up and take a look at this orchid. It's been going, "Hi, I'm here, I'm beautiful," all the time I've been sitting here. It's like shouting at me to go, "Yeah, look, I've got 5 petals, that's not an even number." And it's incredible. So there you go, you're on stage, you got your moment. You know, and then, you know, that was my conscience was telling me that I had to tell people how beautiful this plant is. I mean, they're extraordinary plants. Where they grow and how different they are and how fickle they are. Whoa! I care for 2 at home. I'm a lousy mother. So I think, you know, follow Steve's example. Get out there and touch, feel, taste, smell. Use all your senses to absorb what's out there and in here, rather than our immediate environment. In cities, it's kind of hard to do. You need to put more effort in to get out there.
Would you guys like to add something to that, or shall I? Because a question has just kind of developed as I listened to Catherine sharing, and it's that oftentimes the sentiment that you're expressing of getting back into nature and reconnecting with nature almost has a negative stigma to a certain degree, and I'll share how. This aspect of being hippie-ish or being a tree hugger and so on and so forth. So it's almost like in the modern world, to be civilized, being disconnected from nature is almost a given, if you will, because you have to be so incredibly technologically savvy and informed that you don't have time for those things that are out in nature and so on and so forth, right? So how do we break that conditioning within ourselves, if that happens to be the case? Because I know a lot of people, a lot of friends who are sort of working in the city and so on and so forth. As much as they love spending time in nature, they may never really find the kindness within to offer themselves that time, because they could be learning about something that will progress or further their career, technologically speaking, or, you know, intellectually speaking. And so nature almost, we kind of deviate away from it, you know.
I'm going to answer that very briefly and then hand over to my colleagues, but for me it's about health.
Health, absolutely.
You know, if you're not out there using your body, then you're not healthy and therefore able to do better at work.
Agreed, yeah. Because that's the thing that's our blind spot. We don't see that spending time in nature, silencing the mind, going into stillness, actually increases productivity, increases clarity exponentially, increases our ability to discern, increases our ability to problem solve. But those things aren't so immediately identifiable in a world that's so focused on looking at screens. Right? So.
I don't take a lot of time to go into nature. But the little time that I do get is beautiful and much appreciated. And I've had the fortune of being in the most beautiful places, and I love it. But what I do see is that when people do go into nature, they go into nature to find something. You know, traditionally when it's been mystics who wanted to search for God or the divine, they've gone to the mountaintops, they've gone to forests, and so nature and the divine very deeply connected throughout history and even today. You know, if you want to be alone, where do you go and be alone? So again, nature plays such an important part in all of that.
Nature's everywhere. You know, it's outside on the streets. It's here in front of us, and for me, it's just about opening my eyes. There's a sort of traditional idea of sort of an idyllic rural or wild setting, and you know, it's not available to all of us. So it's about that. It's about that internal attitude that we can develop. And one of the things that I've been trying to do with the deep ecology retreats, which take place in East London, is to put people in touch with just being able to open their eyes and appreciate what's around us. Something that was said for me that happens, I go on quite long solitary retreats, and they are in nature. They're in a beautiful part of the world, and every now and again I get a sort of mini spiritual awakening, and somebody once defined a spiritual awakening as a sense of powerlessness coupled with a sense of infinite possibility. And then that for me, that is the nature of that connection with the natural environment. There's a sense of liberation. And quite often in the spiritual life, there are contradictories, there are apparent contradictions. There's a sense of liberation, but also being deeply connected with who I am through surrendering to something that's much bigger than myself, much more powerful, much more mysterious.
I'd like to touch upon something that you shared earlier, Sister Jayanti, and it was this aspect of the pull of material and material things naturally just subsiding and diminishing with your in your experience. That pull just diminished. My question is how? Really?
It happened in a very dramatic way because I'd been 3 months in India, and I just felt I needed to educate myself, and my first stop was Dadi Janki. I wasn't into meditation at all at that point. Went to see her and started to meditate, and I decided I wanted to live in the center, and that meant a big change from everything I knew, the comforts of London. India was, today you wouldn't call it a third world country, though it is in many parts, but you wouldn't necessarily label it like that. But at that time, everything was very basic, very simple. But something had happened, and I just felt the power of God's love. And none of those things were important. The dust, the flies, the heat. nothing was a factor. And so it really happened through the power of that experience of love. And I survived, not just survived, loved every moment that I stayed in centers. And it was, some centers were okay, some centers were on one level not okay, but it didn't matter. I was so happy and just filled with that love and light. Coming to London, actually, and living in our first center, that was pretty basic, not London standards, very, very basic, but it didn't matter.
There's a beauty in that basicness and simplicity, isn't there?
Not so much beauty as power. Anybody who walked into, give you a bit more description, we were in a little tiny flat in a third-rate area of London, Kilburn. That house is still there, but it's been renovated. The area has upgraded. It's very different now. But it was 2 little rooms, and one room was the bedroom at night. It was the classroom in the day. It was the sitting room also. So everything happened in that room. So that was pretty simple. But it was damp, and we had a little gas fire that you had to put in coins.
Wow.
Before your time.
Yeah,
long before your time, actually. And if you ran out of shillings, and they had shillings in those days.
Wow. Okay.
So it was quite a story. But when people came to learn, how many of you came to learn meditation in Tennyson Road? Maria, that's right. Yes, that's right. And Maureen. Yeah. Actually, by then we'd already got next door. And so it was, we'd advanced exponentially from 2 rooms. But you still saw a very simple lifestyle at that time. But go back a few steps further, and it was even simpler. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the answer I gave to a friend of mine who asked me, when I came to planet Earth, what did I want from it in order to be happy? And I found that the answer was nothing. Which surprised me no end. And I then had to go and think about it. But it sort of echoes the same thing. It's not about the hardship or the lack of that makes you happy at all. Something much more profound. I'm still looking.
I'd like to open the questions to you guys again, because I've hogged the, the Q&A. So, lady at the back.
I just wanted to ask also, I don't know if anyone's ever watched the programme Life Swap, because I think it's very, very inspirational. Because it means that a family, a rich family, swaps with a family that's really struggling with money. And what gentleman just mentioned about starting off in a different place than you end up, which is really interesting because both families get an insight into the lifestyle of somebody else. I just wonder what the panel thought of the idea. Thank you.
Well, I kind of do it quite a lot because I travel a lot, so I'm quite often kind of thrown into completely random situations in sort of less developed countries. So I kind of love it, but I thrive on change. I'm a weird one, but yeah.
Good.
Perspective. You gain perspective, I think. Absolutely. That's my answer.
Yeah. It kind of recalibrates our perspective, doesn't it? Takes us out of our own seemingly complex life. Thanks, you.
I feel I ought to issue a sort of public confession here that actually renunciation has not been a very strong part of my spiritual practice. This is more of an aspiration, but I found that sort of accumulating material goods or material sense of well-being has sort of naturally fallen away, and a part of that for me is my reconnection with the natural world and realising how little I need. I might want a lot, but actually I don't need very much at all.
I think it's a great education.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a question, it's partly a comment and partly a question. Because Sanghasiha said that nature is not a place to visit, it is home. And I really agree with that, and I appreciate that we are surrounded by nature, that everything comes from nature. And I think that if we appreciate what we have, like all this wood here that comes from nature, which is really beautiful, all that is so beautifully done. And there is lots of things of beauty that we can appreciate, and it's all nature. So, like you say, we can appreciate the things that we have immediately in front of us that surround us and that they're nature, but also the awareness that that is our home, that it is our home, that as much as outside, inside is our home. And it's our home not just where we live now here, but the whole planet is our home, and the whole world is our family as well. So I think that really that expands our vision and our awareness of what nature is and the world as well. So it makes us part of it, because I hear a lot about togetherness, that when we're together, then we can achieve anything that seems unachievable. And the other thing is that our actions affect every part of the world and every ecosystem. So again, what kind of actions, how do I behave towards nature, towards everything that's around me, and just to reflect on that and to check myself and make sure that I tread a little bit more lightly, like Catherine said, on the earth. So, but also nature in terms of our inner nature, and this is a question for gentlemen. we talk about nature, but I really feel strongly that what we learn in Raj Yoga is about our inner nature. And when we appreciate our true inner nature, then we appreciate every other nature and everybody else. So for Jayanti, if you can say something about our inner nature and what you said earlier about respecting the self and then respecting everyone else, and what is that basis of respect for this?
My experience is that in order to truly respect myself, when I discover and I have even a glimpse of my own inner core values, but more than that, when I'm able to apply those in my life, then that alignment of inside and out gives me respect. And where my own values might be something I appreciate because I'm now in touch with them, but if I'm not following them through in my own life, I'm not going to be able to respect myself. Nothing to do with what others are seeing or not seeing. It's a question of me knowing I've stepped away from what I know is right and what is something which is valuable for me. And so if I want to get back to that state of natural self-esteem, I have to start following what I'm feeling inside in my day-to-day behavior. Whether it's peace, it's love, it's truth, I have to do it. And then if I can do it and have that value for myself, then I don't demand your attention or your respect. It's okay. I'm stable in my own dignity. You know, there's a song that one of the sisters here used to sing. My dignity is my own and no one can take it away from me. I've forgotten the rest of the lyrics, but it was a very beautiful song. No one can take away my dignity. And that state of having that dignity and respect means I can give you respect. If I'm empty inside of respect for myself, then I don't give you respect. And I try and impose my will on others, or there's all sorts of other things that happen. And if you see this whole thing about relationships today, and especially relationship with nature, it's lack of respect. And so important to find that alignment of inside out.
I forgot what. Thanks for everybody that's spoken. It's been really inspiring. But yeah, the intoxication with economic growth and this technological sort of culture we live in, and how our children and the younger people are consumed with computers and screens and stuff like that. I think it's one of the things you do, Nick, is work to inspire and empower younger children, maybe to look at some of the values and what we place our happiness on. And often we think like happiness is in sort of things and people and places, and looking at those sort of values about what sort of where happiness is, because often I think one of the biggest lies we've been told is happiness is something out there. And children, I think, actually sort of believe that happiness is in things and objects and material goods. And another thought I had was to keep us consumed with all those goods and services we've got. There's like about 12 people all around the world in workshop factories, slave factories, keeping us in the lifestyles that we're accustomed to. And that's the only way we can sort of live that lifestyle, is having people in less developed countries working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, keeping us, in the lifestyles we're accustomed to, having phones like this, having the lifestyles we live, which is completely unsustainable and unethical. And I find it quite challenging to live with that, and I know there's quite a lot in there, but that's just what I'm left with, really. Thank you.
Was there a question in that?
No, it's just how can we address that? Because it's how can we address those issues?
Right.
People, you know, half the world keeping us in this lifestyle that we've been accustomed to, and our children growing up thinking that they're going to find happiness in all these things.
Right. So there's two questions there. One is that happiness is outside children. That happiness is, we're conditioned to believe that happiness is outside of us. And the pursuit of that happiness, we're on a consistent sort of conveyor belt running like hamsters. And the other one is, to a certain degree, how do I make peace with my day-to-day activities contribute to the suffering of nature, earth, and other human beings, ultimately? Because it's everything, though, isn't it? It's literally going and filling up my tank when I go to Texaco or BP. Whose pocket am I putting money in, and what are those guys doing across the world, for example, right? And it goes really quite into many layers there. But so how do I make peace with that? On a day-to-day basis, I'm creating, perhaps to a certain degree, suffering for others, and also the external pursuit of happiness. So.
They'll answer.
Good. I'd love that.
Because I do feel very deeply that the crisis that the world is facing, and whether it's the crisis of injustice, of what we're doing to our children, what we're doing to our environment, I personally feel, and I don't think it's simplistic, I think it works on many, many layers of complexity, is a spiritual response, that it has to be a change of consciousness away from physical identity and identification with I first as this and my as the things and people and whatever. And that very limited vision has created all this nonsense. And until and unless we're willing to change ourselves and our awareness, how can you address injustice? How can you address all the things that children are exposed to? And adults think that objects are going to make me happy, everyone. So the whole thing is a question of what's going on in here. And when we're ready to address that, even if it's a small minority, Margaret Mead said a long time ago, but I truly believe that it's true, that if you want things to change, it's never been a majority that's made things change. It's always been a small group of committed individuals. And so I think that we're very quickly reaching that critical mass. And I think that we're nearly there. I really believe that there are people who are powerful and influential who are now beginning to think in this way. And that's important. There's lots of others, but I think the powerful, influential people beginning to think in this way will be heard, a voice will be heard by many. And so I think we're nearly there, that there can be a change in consciousness that can reach out to the majority and make us say that, yes, we're ready for that shift. And my vision is definitely that there has to come a world of peace again. I believe in cycles. Nature goes through cycles, and artificial lines are human creation. It's not natural, it's us. And so I think that we've been through a long period of darkness, and what's ahead of us is a period of light. Very much in the way that we were advised earlier, both feet on the ground and your hands on your laps. If you're holding papers and things, you can just put them down for a while. I'll speak out my own thoughts in meditation and invite you to follow these ideas. And I think I will bring in the subject of God, because in Raj Yoga meditation, yoga means union with the divine. And you can practice meditation without that belief, but let's experiment, let's try. sitting quietly, reflecting on the things that we've been hearing about. We heard about the journey out into nature, but also the inner journey. I go inside and I see my thoughts. And instead of having thoughts scattered here and there, I choose to bring my thoughts together and channel them in one direction. And in this way, focus on my own inner being to discover more about myself. And as I go deeper and deeper inside myself, I realize that there's a space within where there's calm, peace, stillness, silence. Here my mind is quiet. And in fact, as my thoughts slow down, I can feel the point of peace within. And in this awareness of peace, I can feel the presence of the divine. And peace opens the door to the experience of a wave of love that reaches me. And the love is able to cleanse the dust that had accumulated. And I can feel my own light shine. I am a being of light. I am a being of peace. In this awareness, connected to my entire human family, the power of that supreme peace and divine love reaches not only I, the soul, but extends out to my human family. And further, supreme peace and divine love reach out and touch all forms of light, all forms of life. they catch this peace and love. Their fear is removed. The light connects with the light. They feel safe and secure. And the peace and love reaches out and touches nature. And nature returns to a state of harmony. And humans and nature come back into a mode of cooperation again. And as we give that peace and love to nature, nature returns to its pristine purity. And the power of peace and love transform this world of ours. Om Shanti.
It was so beautifully expressed, and a lot of things, wisdom in particular, for us to take away here and see how we can sort of implement that into our own lives. So first of all, a big thank you to our three speakers, Catherine, Dharmachari Sanghasiha, and Sister Jayanti.